For our next unit, we will be talking about what happens to America now that it gains its independence from Britain. We just finished up the Revolutionary or the War of Independence. We're going to see some of the challenges that this brand new country is going to face and then how we react. One question that these now Americans, we'll call them, that they had to ask themselves was their identity. And in class, we talked about what is your identity? What is your identifier? If you were traveling, say you're traveling in Europe and someone says, oh, where are you from? Do you say, I'm from California? Or do you say, I'm American? This was a very real issue in the 1780s following the Revolutionary War because there were these 13 individual states. People had an identity with their state, not necessarily the Union. And this will offer some challenges. These people believe that they want to be a republic, and this would be a system, and they're looking back to the Romans essentially, but a system where the people and their elected officials hold power. And so they're definitely making clear that they want to choose their leaders. They don't want it to be a monarch. They don't want it to be a hereditary system. And these people also, we start talking about the idea of a democracy or democratic ideals where everyone is involved in making these decisions. So it's not just a few people who are electing them, but we want all citizens to be involved in this. Another thing that we start seeing in the 1780s and 90s that really is part of the American identity is what we call the American Trinity. We watched this video in class talking about these ideals that are so uniquely American. E pluribus unum. Out of many, one. That anyone can come to this country and become American. The second part was in God we trust, accepting this higher being, in our case, the sort of Hebrew God, who is giving people rights. He has endowed us with natural rights. Therefore, because God has given us those rights, no government by man should be able to take those rights. And then the third part is liberty, this idea of freedom. And this is not purely an American idea, but combining it with the others, that liberty is related to these other two ideals. And one thing in the video it specifies is the difference between liberty and equality. And Dennis Prager says in the video, we are equal before the law, but we won't necessarily end up equal. So these are really American ideals that are developing even as the Revolutionary War is coming to a close. So the situation after the Revolutionary War is a little bit like this. We have, America, we are the United States, but the system of government is a little lopsided. It looks like it might collapse, but as you see here, the citizen, the people, they are the defining factor, what's going to keep things standing upright. So the system of government following the Revolutionary War is under the Articles of Confederation. The purpose or the main reason these articles exist is going back to the problems with Great Britain. The Americans experienced absolute rule under King George III, and so many people did not want a central or a national government. And each state, with their individual identity, they want to make sure that each state has its own sovereignty, that each state is in control of itself. So really, with this sort of first government, the Articles of Confederation, this really isn't about a United States with one shared identity. It's kind of an alliance of 13 distinct, different mini countries, almost. So each state is part, it's its own thing, it's its own entity. And the Articles of Confederation, the Confederation is just the relationship, tying them together. We all broke away at the same time. We have a few things in common, but each of us is very distinct from the other. This system has some problems, however. There's lots of economic problems. with money. How do you raise money? If this is a united system, you can't raise money because each individual state has the right to tax its citizens. But the National Congress, it can only request that the states pay taxes. But there's nothing holding them to this. Then we have the issue of currency. As you see here, each state has its own currency. So if you have debts in New York, but you live in Pennsylvania, how do you pay your bills? How do you pay for the veterans left over from the war? And so the debt that came from fighting the Revolutionary War is very difficult to pay for because everyone is using a different system. Robert Morris, who you read about, he had a suggestion for a bank system that would make its own money, print coins, but he found that working with these individual states and trying to coordinate with Congress was near impossible, so he kind of gives up. So we have this issue of debt. This country, this brand new country, is in debt. These states are in debt. They have to make money somehow. So they're going to use land. So these are the Northwest Ordinances, the series of laws passed dealing with the Northwest Territory. See here in the yellow, this is territory that was won as part of the Revolutionary War in signing the Treaty of Paris in 1783. Now, Thomas Jefferson sees this land as the ideal opportunity to encourage and support what he would call the yeoman farmer, that quintessential American who is going to work with the land with his bare hands. And today we can still see the impact of Jefferson's plans because Jefferson was a man of the Enlightenment, reason and logic and order, making order out of the chaos. And so in his mind, he wanted to make a grid. And we still see that today. If you fly cross country, not only are many of the states, as you go further west, in a block pattern, but even the way we farm is still in these square mile grids. We even see it in Los Angeles. We see the influence of this Enlightenment era thinking, and it starts back in the 1780s with these Northwest Ordinances. So how is this going to fix the debt? Well, with these territories, they are owned by the Congress, they're owned by the government. They will be sold to individuals. People want to push westward, they want more territory, they want to set up these farms. And these ordinances, these laws, give a way for people to create states. We have 13 states. Well, now these ordinances say we have all of this territory, let's get people to move out there. And we're going to create laws and ways for people to be a part of this political system. So when you get 5,000 citizens, you're going to be appointed a governor, a secretary, and judges, and Congress is going to appoint those people for you. Then when you get 5,000 free males, then you have the authority to elect representatives, and you can choose to become a state. So we're selling the land and getting money, but we're also extending the territory of the United States. One thing that's really important about these territories is the Northwest Ordinances does say there will be no slavery in these territories. So we're really starting to see the differences between slave states and free states. Last thing about the Northwest Ordinances is it does encourage education. It's saying that it's making a bold statement about the American idea that religion is important, morality is important, and education will be important for this system to work. Because we want this to be a democratic republic where people are involved, we need those people to be educated, to be critical thinkers. So while the Articles of Confederation, for the most part, don't work, the Northwest Ordinances are incredibly successful at raising funds, at developing lands that can be states eventually. But for the most part, the Articles of Confederation are a big mess. Diplomatically, because each of these 13 states is functioning on its own, there is no unified system of doing things. And this is difficult because not everything is perfect with some of our previous relationships. With England, they were a little bit bitter about losing us and about the war. and they decided they weren't going to trade with us anymore. So England reestablishes the Navigation Acts, which were created by Oliver Cromwell, saying that all items that would be sold in Britain must arrive on British ships, meaning they're not going to trade with America anymore. The national government, the Congress, has no power to do anything to fight against them because they can't raise an army. They have no funds. Then we have the issue of Spain. Spain was claiming that they had total control of the Mississippi. If you see here Hernando de Soto, we found it, it's ours. But one of the provisions of the Treaty of Paris in 1783 was open access to the Mississippi River. But without a military and without the money to pay for a military, the United States government, under the Articles of Confederation, is powerless to do anything. Then we have the Barbary Pirates. Now again, because we break away from England, the British Navy is no longer going to protect American ships. And in the Mediterranean, that means that American ships are now vulnerable to the Barbary pirates that were there in North Africa. While these pirates are essentially pillaging American vessels, we are pretty powerless to do anything because we don't have the funds, we don't have the means to protect ourselves because of this weak central government. Again, the people wanted a weak central government. They don't want an absolute leader like we had with King George. In addition to the economic problems, the diplomatic problems, there are, of course, political problems. It is so hard to accomplish anything because each of these states is sovereign. Each of these states is independent and can control itself. What interest do they have in cooperating? There is no court system that can help mediate issues between states. There is no one person or one group that's in charge. Congress can attempt to make laws, but how do you enforce them? It's hard to pass laws at a national level because if each of these states has a totally separate identity, what interest do they have in cooperating? And so we can kind of look at this like this ship that is about to be pushed aside. The waves of these problems, no power to collect taxes, no power to raise an army, no national court system. The Articles of Confederation, they're on rocky ground, or they're in rocky waters. We can look at this like one of these crazy bikes where you have a huge wheel, and here we have the state governments, states' rights are supreme, and the national government, the Congress, has very little efficacy, has very little effectiveness. This might work for a little bit of time, but this system won't be stable for any great length of time. And this is really made very clear by Shays' Rebellion in 1786. Now, this takes place in western Massachusetts. There are a group of Revolutionary War veterans. They are farmers. They're not anywhere near Boston, but they are being really hit hard by these economic problems. They haven't been paid for their service, but their debts are being called up by these bankers, who many of them are in Boston. So Daniel Shays, he organizes other like-minded citizens, and they start to protest. They actually force jails to sort of open to let debtors free, because their argument, the rebellion's argument, is that these debtors have no way of paying their debts. They force the governor of Massachusetts to sort of organize a militia to put down the revolution. And the value of Shays' Rebellion is really in calling attention to the issues of these Articles of Confederation. Certainly, these states wanted their rights, but without any central government to enforce these rights, citizens are not going to benefit. And so we see that with Shays' Rebellion, that maybe these articles need to be changed.